Go.
There?
Okay. So
Are you there, Stephen?
Yeah, Stephen, you're there, right? You're just on mute. Or maybe you went to dinner.
Maybe he's got his mouth full.
Well,
There he
Hear
is.
me now. Can you?
Stephen, were you able to
Could-
record anything from the cabaret the other night with your music?
I think they made some recordings, but sorry, you couldn't make it.
Oh, we are too.
no, we were trying to make it. We got derailed.
We were on our way there
Uh,
when
Oh.
a fire came up with a meal that we felt we had to put out. But we were there in spirit and really wanted to be there in body and hear it. How did you feel that it went? They had a
Well,
cabaret at the church, and Stephen did some of his music.
Stephen's writing a
Yeah.
musical Broadway show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm writing it. We'll see ever, if it ever gets produced. That's another story. But to answer your question, it went okay. The issue with doing something like this is, in large part, doing an arrangement that's simplified for just piano, giving it to an accompanist who is totally unfamiliar with it, and then basically sight reading to the best of her ability, which, and generally speaking, her ability is fine. It's just that, basically what she did was not what I wrote. It was okay. Basically, people could get the idea of what it was, but for me, it's in certain ways it's a disappointment. The other thing is that I'm not a practiced singer, and
But you did your own
you know,
singing?
Yeah.
yeah,
you're
yeah,
singing.
yeah.
The
So I'm
pianist.
playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pianist accompanying it, so I'm playing singer-songwriter, and and my singing chops are rather limited. I sort of think about my singing the way I used to think about my tennis game. When I played tennis, I actually had a really good serve when it was working. It's like it was really good. The problem was, more of it than not, it didn't work at all. For love or money, I could not get that serve in the box. But when I was on, it was really good. And my singing is kind of like that. It's not bad when I'm on, but it's not consistently on, and to be better, I'd have to be singing all the time and, working on really improving it. And so
Well, just do your
just jump
scales
up.
in the shower,
Yeah, well, that's not gonna happen. But at any rate, it's okay. It's just a bunch of people just trying to have a fun evening, so it's not like it's the Grammys or something, So
Sure.
anyways, it went okay. I mean, it's it's a kind of an interesting thing for me is that when I first started, taking some lessons with Marcella when she was giving lessons, one of the things that she would say, to me and everybody else who was really nervous about singing,
Right here.
was that no matter how bad you do, you're not going to die. It might feel like you're going to die, but you're not.
You might wish you could.
Yeah, I mean, you want to crawl into a rock when you mess up, but the fact is that, you'll survive and life goes on. And so I go up there and I do my thing, and it is what it is. What can I say? So I try to have a healthy attitude about it.
Sounds like you do.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a hell of a lot of courage. So I applaud
You
that.
know, it's like anything else. It's you know, the hardest part, you know, and I mean this literally, as far as I'm concerned, the hardest part of doing literally anything is actually making the decision to do it and then getting it into gear, you know, just doing it. And you know, so you know, I got to a point, you know, where I decided, it was a practical decision, really, you know, was that I'm writing a musical. People have to hear the music. I'm going to be in situations where I have no choice but to sing my own music. So just get used to it and do it. And so that's what I did. And I tried to improve my voice a little bit so as to make it a bit more tolerable. But, you know, it is what it is. I don't purport to be a singer or a performer. You know, I'm a guy writing music, and you know, I'm doing my best to share it. That's kind of my attitude. And let somebody else who knows what they're doing be the performer, you know.
Sure.
And so, you know, anyway, so it was fun, you know.
Well, that'll be your next step. This was just the
Yeah, what's
beginning.
yeah.
Okay, let's get going. I'm going to start off with something that I actually saw years ago that was the popular media picking up on something that was in some sense spiritual, and they ended up calling it the Indigo Children. So I'm just going to play this, and you'll see this is, you know, popular media trying to make sense out of a new trend in spirituality, and we're going to come back and revisit this then in a much deeper way. So here we go. The Indigo Children.
Did we find a way to mute my eating?
No.
Without thinking, just say, I am color X. What color do you think you are?
Sort of a creamy orange.
A creamy orange.
Yes,
Okay.
and off-white, like you might have had your walls in the late 90s.
We are going to do your aura photo. We find more often than not people will actually get their color right. We have a sense of who we are.
Can't wait. Let's see what happens. Put your hands on these plates. Feels a little bit like the electric chair. Is that?
There's little danger here.
Okay.
Here we go.
An aura is a coloured band that some people say they can see around a human body, showing its spiritual state. Few can see them, but I found a man called Eric Sage who said he had a camera that could do just that. It seemed like an odd job, looking up people's auras every day. A bit awkward to be stepping in on something so private, but I supposed Eric was a professional, like a gynecologist or such.
That's pretty good.
This is Tinder Gold, right here.
When I was 4, I had many visions of meeting God and meeting new people.
Indigo Children. Astral beings sent to guide us all to a higher plane, or hyper children running around with untreated ADD.
How can you tell if your child is gifted or has a disorder? Some parents and even some doctors believe that a number of children today are gifted with psychic powers. They call them Indigo Children.
The term's been around since the 1970s, coined by psychologist and medium Nancy Antap, who claimed she'd noticed a sharp uptick in the number of babies born with indigo-coloured auras. But it was in the 90s that the phenomenon took off in the mainstream. Thanks to the book The Indigo Children, the new kids have arrived. My husband and wife team, Lee Cowell and Jan Tober.
Say you're an indigo, and somebody comes up to you and asks you a question about their life, and you can tell them what it was and how it happened.
They entered all of our homes. Oprah featured them, documentaries exposed them, and all across America, thousands of parents refused to swallow their kids' ADHD medicine, rejecting medical diagnoses in favour of declaring their kids as indigo.
I think it's a stab at trying to apply a more positive label to these children rather than the more pejorative terms like ADHD.
Many of the kids who were raised in its shadows are now adults. Do they still see it as their glorious destiny, or as something much less benign? So what the fuck are you gonna go down the building? Let me get real quick. I've come to America to see how brightly the indigo movement's aura is still shining. The journey began in New York, where I was in Sheepshead Bay to meet a full-blown adult indigo. It's been hard to put a definition on what exactly Indigo is. The Indigos are a leaderless group, but Edward, the man I'm about to meet, is at least the leader of the New York City Indigo meetup group, so perhaps he'll have some ideas. Edward claimed to be on an intense spiritual journey, which was in part why his apartment contained no furniture. He first diagnosed himself Indigo over a decade earlier, after an online test. Hello, Edward. I'm Gavin. Come over from England to search about Indigo Children. I gather you're the boss of the NYC meetup group for Indigos. Yes, I'm the founder. So what are the key Indigo traits? Highly psychic or intuitive. Many of them will capable of healing other people, whether emotionally or energetically or physically. Non-conformity to anything from school to parents to jobs. That is why many of them out of place. They're just plain simple different. There is no label for it. It's not ADD or ADHD. It's just a different vibrational, energetical type of a person. The whole notion of indigos, the whole idea is pretty much to change the way of the world in every aspect. And what are you here to do differently? My spiritual journey to help people to bring the change individually as well as on a group level through spiritual awakening, conscious awakening, and change all the patterns you acquired one lifetime after another. Could you perhaps read my past lives? I will need to shut my eyes for a moment to give you an answer for that also. Edward didn't seem to be getting any information about my past life. Was that the psychic's protective boredom threshold kicking in? Even I wasn't sure. So it's very interesting. First of all, I am not getting any information about your past life, but still some information came through that I was told to relate to you. Okay, and that information actually, first of all, you are an indigo yourself. You are an indigo. I'm an indigo yourself, first of all. Second of all, it is so. Find your core. Find what moves you and makes your soul and your heart sing, and do that. You will be able to bring a lot of changes and beauty to this world in your own way. Okay, well, and on that, I'm on Bombshell. This is Gavin Haynes, Indigo, signing off with Edward Tarashansky, Indigo. Very nice meeting you, brother. Edward's message, to find what moves me, was inspiring. But as what moved me was cockfighting and the films of Michael Bay, perhaps I was going to struggle to bring much joy into the wider world. The upside to being diagnosed Indigo was that I was now part of a kind of extended family. I wanted to go meet more of my brothers and sisters, so I went to see the brands. Idel, who was a holistic dentist, and her daughter, Diandra, who was an indigo healer. Hello! Holistic dentistry, it turns out, was just like regular dentistry, but with tuning forks sending out psychic vibrations, spiritually charged crystals for patients to hold during their root canal, and funky esoteric necklaces. So, not much like regular dentistry then. What does holistic dentistry entail?
Holistic dentistry entails working with materials for the patient's highest good. You want to use dental materials that are biocompatible. Therefore, you don't want to use anything that's toxic, like silver mercury fillings are very bad. We also avoid fluoride, because fluoride also is neurotoxic.
And Diandra, you are an indigo?
Yes. At 16, I became a full-blown intuitive. I started seeing angels around people. I started seeing colors of the etheric field, chakras on people. And then I started talking to other forms, so angels, archangels, ascended masters, goddesses, etc. So for me, it wasn't about separating myself or thinking that it was weird or different. It was just about knowing there's something more and what can I do with this gift.
We've written this book, Enlightened Indigo Child, so that parents and children together can learn what they need to do to have a very healthy child. All these kids are being institutionalized and labeled with some horrible mental or emotional disease, which they don't really have.
And with the example of Diandra, was she ever labeled?
Well, she was labeled as having some sort of disability, a learning disability. Here's a child who's absolutely brilliant in more ways than one, and we have a teacher who thinks she's got a problem.
Okay.
I know my child better than any teacher. I know she doesn't have a problem. If anyone has a problem, it's the teacher and the school system.
The brands offered to show me one of the services that made their dentistry holistic, specially made tuning forks to detox the body and balance its energies.
The reason why we got into this was because I had my own challenges. I had Lyme disease for 8 years. And when I had it, I was quite handicapped. Conventional medicine said that I would never be well and I should just close up my practice and go on permanent disability. And that was gone when I took the weekend course in the tuning forks. It changed me. It changed my whole life.
Sitting in the dentist chair, having tuning forks waved around me, felt very luxurious. It was a bit like when I was a kid and they had calming pictures of Donald Duck on the ceiling at the dentist.
So how are you?
Just kind of triple balls there. Yeah. Idel seemed to place a lot of weight on her daughter's specialness, and the dynamic between them was certainly intense. A St. Elmo's fire of the auric field. Flemington, New Jersey. When we heard that there was going to be a psychic fair at the local elk lodge, my own psychic sense told me that maybe we could find an indigo or two here.
Well, the stones have all different properties. For example, we have like a rose quartz.
Yeah.
You're looking for love.
Can we get a couple of them? How much are they? They're $3 a pop. Bargain. Are you indigo? Do you know any indigos?
Yes, I'm an indigo.
Are you?
Yes.
How does it feel?
It was interesting now as an adult, I can say I was out of body and I was more comfortable out in nature or in solitude than I was comfortable at school or with other kids.
So what are you doing here? Fair?
I'm a shamana, which means a female healer. So I'm doing etheric surgery and armor removal, which means we're blocking the flow of spiritual energy.
It sounds like very important work. Thank you very much for your sharing.
Thank you so much.
Not only was this a one-stop mediclinic for lyric surgery, Psychic Fair was also full of the usual clairvoyants, gemstone salesmen, and auric artists.
Not the artwork. Is there something representational here?
Chronotherapy, color healing, working with colors.
What about indigo? Is this a color which you incorporate within your palette?
Yeah, indigo is a very powerful color.
Are you aware of the concept of indigo children?
I have an indigo child.
Do you?
I do.
And what is it like to be an indigo mother? And is that a special thing?
Well, you kind of buckle up and sit
Yeah.
back and relax as best as you can because they're always on the go. They're very knowledgeable. They're very insightful to the point where it can be a little bit spooky sometimes how they know things.
Was this child asked to be put on medication at any point?
I pretty much refused medication.
Okay.
We used sugared iced tea.
What's that?
Iced tea
Okay, sugar.
that has sugar because it reverses, it calms them down. Like if she had a test, she would get really, really nervous. So in the morning, I would be sure,
Normally sugar would hype kids up.
and it has the reverse effect on my daughter.
That is one to ponder. Thank you very much for your time.
Good to meet you.
Turns out I've been treating myself as an indigo for many years, sugared iced tea, and didn't even know it. Indigos seem to be plugged into a higher spiritual switchboard. I began to wonder what would happen if I dialed out to modern psychology. It was time to seek out professional help.
Thanks so much for sitting down with us. Why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your practice?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with children, teens, and adults. I specialize in ADHD.
What are the key symptoms of ADHD?
Many people know the basic ones of lack of focus and inattention, difficulty getting started on tasks, so that's procrastination. And once you get started on something, it's very hard to maintain effort, so you kind of lose effort and focus. Difficulty actually regulating your emotions.
That sounds like a lot of people I know.
It's not so much the symptoms as to the severity.
I mean, what does treatment involve for ADHD nowadays?
Basically, nowadays, Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, Vyvanse, stimulants are the main treatment.
So you very much believe that ADHD and ADD are real things, real entities in the world. These are diagnosable conditions.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier a case of a woman who came to you with a child who potentially had ADHD, but she had diagnosed as indigo and
Yeah.
taken away from you again. What happens if ADHD goes unchecked?
Years of undiagnosed ADHD lead to school failure. And if he's super hyperactive, maybe he can't make friends and keep friends. And year after year of failure compounded leads to real or pervasive and deep shame about oneself, which is the recipe for depression and anxiety and drug use and then possibly jail. Recognizing a child with ADHD can draw well or horseback ride or do something unique and supporting those gifts is great. But saying that you, without doing anything, are unique and special and different than every other child is not helpful.
You think they're making mini monsters, children who can only be isolated?
Yes, right. Narcissists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a bad thing.
Yes.
The older I've gotten, the more I've realized that my drawing usually is really much better than I think it is when I just don't judge it at all. When I kind of just draw. And there's no judgment, and it's just freestyle. Oh, this is actually the chakra test that I took online. My indigo third eye was 89%. The most.
Yeah.
Serafina was diagnosed as indigo at a young age by her mother when she started recognizing her extraordinary gifts.
Were you already interested in the idea of indigo children? Was it something that appealed to you?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I think from the time I was in my 20s, I began delving into spirituality and meaning of life, vibrations, past lives.
When did you first realize that your daughter was an indigo child?
Oh, very, very early on. From the moment that she was an infant, the unique way Serafina sees the world, visually, in terms of perspective, it's very different.
Some people feel that indigo children have been sent here
to open up the world to a new age. Do you feel that you've been sent here to open up the world to a new
I
age?
feel that I've been sent here not only to benefit those who know me in terms of giving advice or having a shoulder for someone to cry on or be able to give them a different perspective on life, but also just for me to figure out what I'm here for and figuring out what my journey is.
I'm constantly learning from her. So each year is just this new discovery of the more gifts she has. Tell me about your gifts.
I can read auras of people that I've been living with for a while, like my mom or my brother. I always realize, like, yeah, she has this orange glow about her, and it was something that I
Okay, so it's orange.
orange.
No, I don't see him.
And what about your brother's aura?
I'd say my brother's aura is like a light blue. He's definitely blue because I find blue to be like strong, and it can kind of be cold or even aggressive.
A cold blue. Was it any wonder her brother was called Azure? Serafina seems to spend a lot of time comparing herself to her older brother. The more she talked to him, the more I sensed the dynamic between them could be the key to something.
What was it like growing up with an indigo sister? Serafina's a lot more artistic and creative than I am, and she has a very different way of viewing things than I do, and I think that was like obviously a large source of our confrontations. Academically, schools come much easier to me than it has to Serafina. That's not to say it's lack of trying on her part, but for me, it was like school was always a second thought. It was like whatever I want to do, and then sure, I'll get my A's and then move on. Whereas for Serafina, she really had to like sit down and contain her attention on the one topic at hand.
Do you have any interest in that sort of esoteric realm? Are you into vibrations, crystals, those sorts of things?
No, that to be completely honest, that just granted,
Wait, no, finish that thought. I want to hear that. It makes you what?
It makes me laugh almost like it's a joke. The significance of her being some type of like I don't know like
Okay.
I understand she's a unique individual, but like
put a label on that, and
it's like as an indigo child, I am not really if there's going to be like a new wave where they lead our world, our civilized through their creativity. Maybe I don't know.
But probably not.
Probably not. No.
Okay.
I think they'd have trouble with their shopping list.
Zio was right. As an indigo, I did have a great deal of trouble with my own shopping list. But then taking over the world is frankly a completely different skill set. In a world of online auto-diagnosis quizzes, Indigo has long since spread its tentacles outside of the realms of psychic fairs to the hip-hop community. Together with the likes of Pro Era and Flatbush Zombies, the Underachievers are popularizers of an esoteric rap phenomenon some call Beast Coast, preaching the gospel of Indigo through their music. I went to New York's Webster Hall for their homecoming show.
So where my motherfucking Indigo's at in the building? Let me get real quick. I said, where my motherfucking Indigo's at in the building?
Everywhere I'm at right now. For us. Guys, make it possible.
Our generation. I don't think that I'm going to succeed, but in the past 2 years, 3 years of us trying to do it passionately, we've come far.
I mean, what do you think of the link between ADD and indigo? Do you think there is a case for the counter argument that, like, some kids diagnosed as indigo when they should be on medication?
I don't believe in ADHD because when I was younger, I was like smart, but I was like very bad in class, like mischievous. So they wanted to put me on Ritalin and like Adderall. Thank God for my mom. She was like, no way. I seen that they kept telling kids that they had ADHD. A lot of kids out of my generation. So I started to do research on it online thanks to the internet. I came across indigo. So then I just went on a mission from then, for me telling as many kids like, yo, you're not hyperactive. You're probably indigo. That's where it all started. So
Diagnosis indigo.
Yeah.
But is everyone indigo? Is that like a kind of blanket statement? I mean, what percentage of your friends are indigo?
Everyone, you are.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Okay.
It's because of the power of the internet, right? It's linking us up in a way that we've never been able to link up before. And if the indigo shit became the universal consciousness, that's like my religion, what I believe in. That's pretty much saying that God is the combination of every single living thing on the planet. But the problem is that we have country lines that are divided by economic class and weight class and intelligence and color and race and culture and religion and all these different ways that are dividing us. We lose track of the connection that really keeps us together.
Hearing us talk about this global lattice of weirdos and creatives he was hooking up was as powerful a vision of culture as I'd heard in quite some time. Indigo or no, he was a special kid. As the night wore on, indigo and branding mixed easily. I could also wonder what indigo was doing to their health because I've never seen so many medical marijuana prescriptions in my life. Around 1 a.m., Isa decided to teach me a funky new hip-hop dance called The Elephant. My standing had fallen sharply within the rap community since I'd failed to learn how to doogie, so it seemed a chance worth taking. Felt really bad spilling his drink, but then, as an indigo, I knew he'd forgive me. That's how it works, right? I'm at the end of my quest. I'm exhausted. My aura is just a pool of muddy brown cosmic sweat dripped around me. I've been promised a series of golden gods, but overall, I can't say I've been overly convinced by the extrasensory powers of the people I've met. Overall, Indigo seems to be a catch-all for a range of New Age experiences. Talking to angels, color therapy, sensitivity to others, these have all been around for hundreds of years. Why is Indigo happening now? Because people need it. Like any religion, Indigos externalize a higher power, which then validates their own sense of internal specialness. That's not always a problem. The more I've interacted with the Indigo tribe, the more I've come to see them as an important rebuttal to the idea that medicating anyone can solve their problems. Some people just are different. They learn differently. They think unconventionally. We're all told we're special. It's just when some people are told they're more special than others that the awkwardness starts to creep in.
Okay, so there's our little introduction to this. And now I spent some time trying to track down different things on this. And I came back with, hold on one sec, I'm gonna get out of this and go over to here, to here. And Stephen's in twice.
I admit it.
How could you be in two places at once when you're really nowhere at all?
So what I'm gonna do.
The truth.
Do you remember Fireside Theater?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm gonna run through what Dolores Cannon has to say based on thousands of interviews with different people. So let me see what we can do here.
Peekaboo, false atmosphere. Welcome to the enchanted forest of Ghost Defense. Here, hidden among the trees.
And you'll be notified when it comes up. All right. Well, one thing, I've written 15 books, and what we did, if you didn't know about it, this one here, we said we were going to be like Disney and open up the vault and let out the ones who have been out of print. This one was out of print for several years, this Legacy from the Stars. And we kept getting emails and people saying, don't you have a damaged, torn up copy around somewhere? Because they wanted to have all of them. And we found on Amazon, they were selling this for $100 for a used copy.
Oh.
And so we said, we should have held on to some. But we said, maybe we better bring it back out and at least a limited edition. Of course, the people who are selling them for that price are not going to be happy. But so we have printed it again, and it's Legacy from the Stars. So now all of them are out. But there are some of mine that we're going to go out of print. So you never know. If the demand comes up again, we may reprint them. You probably know this one is the one I sat on for 40 years. That's the one of my beginning. That came out after the conference, I believe, in July. I don't think we had it at the conference, did we? Last year. A lot of you know how I started out, I think. I'm just going to give a little abbreviated version, but I've been doing hypnosis for over 40 years. I started out in the 1960s when nobody knew anything about any of this. And this is the story of how it all began. That's what we call it, the beginning. But when I started out 40 years ago, we were just doing hypnosis for habits. Stop smoking, lose weight, to watch the shiny object, that kind of thing, the long drawn out induction techniques, which aren't done anymore. But that was all we were doing it for. And we accidentally, if anything is ever an accident, stumbled into reincarnation. So it's quite a story because in those days, there was nothing out to tell anybody what to do. New Age wasn't heard of yet. We didn't hardly hear about reincarnation in this part of the world at all. They didn't know anything about past life regression. Hypnosis was not done for that. The only book out at that time was The Search for Bridie Murphy. And that would wouldn't be published today. It's too simple, too ordinary. But that was the only thing out at that time. There were no books that tell any hypnotist what to do
if you did get into a situation where there were past lives would come up. So we started out in the very, very beginning. And this is the story of my husband and I and how it all happened and how it came to a very tragic end. But it was all designed to get me to where I am right now. How many of you don't know how I started? There's not very many. I'll just give it real brief because we have a lot of information to cover tonight. But my husband and I were living on a Navy base. He was career Navy, 21 years. And we were stationed down in Texas. He just got back from Vietnam. And we'd learned how to do hypnosis, and just the simple kind. And we were working on that, helping people on the base. And the doctor on the base had a case of a young woman who, what is called nervous eating. Is that echoing to you? Is it? Okay, yeah, because to me, it's bouncing off the walls. I'm getting all kinds of sound distortion. But he had a woman who he called nervous eating. She was very obese and her kidneys were bad. And he asked us, could we just get her to relax? That was all he wanted us to do. And when we were doing the sessions with her, she ended up going back into a past life where she was in Chicago in the 1920s as a roaring flapper, living with the gang. And it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because it was totally unexpected. So even from the beginning, without knowing what we were doing, having any instructions at all, we dove right into all of this because of curiosity. And we ended up taking her through 5 lives. That's why it's called 5 Lives, 3 Members. But in those days, nobody knew anything about it. So the people on the base began to hear what we were doing. We kept her anonymous, and they came to the house and was listening to the next chapter. We were doing all of this on the portable recorders of the day, those big reel-to-reels. You remember the portable, you could hardly lift the thing. And so we had to do it at the house. And they would come because they wanted to know the next chapter. Nobody had ever heard about anything like this. In a way, it was opening people's minds to something totally unknown in those days. And everybody began talking about it. We took her through 5 different lives. And then in the middle of all of this, my husband was almost killed. He made it back from Vietnam fine, but he was on his way to the base one night and was almost killed by a drunken officer who hit him head on, and he had a Volkswagen bus. Can you imagine what the head-on collision in a Volkswagen bus is? There's nothing in front of you. There's no motor or anything, so he was ground into the metal. He should have died that night. It was very, very bad. His entire body was crushed. So what ended up happening, they had to cut him out, cut the wreckage apart. They didn't have those jaws of life in those days. And they brought in the helicopter and got him into the hospital. And when I got there, the only thing that saved his life was there was a corpsman following him behind, in the car behind him, who had just got back from Vietnam. So he knew how to work with trauma cases. Otherwise, he would have bled to death right there because he lost all the blood in his body. His body was crushed, his face was torn apart. And so they got him into the helicopter and got him to the hospital. And then I followed over there. They came and got me. So at the hospital, when I was waiting, he was in intensive care. 5 doctors, one after the other, came out and said, there's no way he can live. There's too much trauma to the body. All these lists of things that were going to kill him during the night. Well, when we were doing this hypnosis experiment, not knowing what we were doing, no rules or anything, we were trying everything. So toward the end, we had her go into the future. And we said, just to see out of curiosity what we would be doing and what she would be doing. So we took her into the future, and she saw us living in the situation where we are now. We live on top of a mountain out here in Arkansas, in the country, and she saw us there with grandchildren. So that was all she said. But that night, when the doctors were telling me there was no way he could possibly live, I kept telling him, you're wrong, you're wrong. I couldn't tell him how I knew, just that I knew if she saw us in the future, he had to be going to live through all of this. But what happened was so magnificent, because when we took her through the 5 lives, she went back to the beginning where she was created by God. And we found a God that was so love and full of love, I knew he couldn't punish somebody for just asking questions and wanting to know more information. So I knew we had to believe it. I had to believe it all. So I knew he wasn't going to die that night. But in the days that followed, they had to put him back together piece by piece. They called him the Miracle Man because they said they had no way he could have lived through any of this. And if he did live, he was going to be a vegetable because of all the brain trauma. Well, they thought they were going to do plastic surgery, and the doctors came and told me, we're not going to have to do anything. Every face is going back together without anything being done. Of course, he was unconscious there for several months as all this was happening. But the thing about it was, you got to think, I guess, we changed the belief system of a lot of people on that base. And the word began to get around what had happened to him. They were all saying, this is your punishment for what you were doing. Peeking around hidden corners. Reincarnation, for goodness sake. Work of the devil. And so they kept saying, this is what was happening to us because of what we were involved with. I couldn't believe it. I never could. So it ended up anyway, he was in the hospital for a year, 8 months in a body cast. I couldn't even begin to imagine what that would be like to not be able to move for 8 months. But when he was finally put out of the Navy, after he got out of the hospital, he was put out of the Navy and we moved to Arkansas, where we had to build our life all over again. And he was in a wheelchair for 25 years. So during that time, I had to put the idea of hypnosis on the back burner while I was taking care of him and raising a big family. So it was 10 years. Now it would be over 30 years ago, I decided to get back into it. It's like, what do you do now with the empty nest syndrome when the kids are leaving? They're going off, getting married and going to college. What are you going to do with your life? That experience that we had opened a door. I found we could time travel. We could go through time. We could be there for these things. It was wonderful adventure. And I said, that's what I want to do. That's the kind of therapy I want to do, is take people in past lives. So that's what, when it came time, I started learning some of the newer methods that were now involving imagery and visualization. And as I did them, I was focusing on past life regression, the past life therapy. Then I began to develop my own system because I never had any rules or regulations. So my whole training has been just what I have learned myself over the last 30 years. So during this last 30 years, I found a way to contact what I call the source of all knowledge. This is not your normal hypnosis. I think when you take these classes, you're taught by what somebody was taught them, that somebody taught them, and somebody taught them going all the way back. You never really know why you're doing what you're doing. But because I didn't have that, I was free to experiment. And as I began to develop the technique, I said, why do I have to do those things? Isn't it easier to do it a different way? So that's why I developed my own way of doing hypnosis. And this is what I'm teaching now all over the world, because I found a way. The past lives are the beginning, the very tip of the iceberg. And if you read my earlier books, they deal with when I was beginning, what I call time travel, going back in time when the person was there in that time period and living what was happening to them. It was really time travel. That was my first book that I was writing about those cases that came to me. People said, how did I find my subjects? I never went looking for anybody. They found me in the hills of Arkansas, but I think they had a lot to do with all of this. Nothing is ever a coincidence. So the first books I wrote were the Jesus book, and then the Nostradamus book came along. But as I developed the technique, I worked in the deepest possible level of trance. I have to understand these things because sometimes I give a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, somebody will say, I still don't understand how you got this information. So that's why I'm trying to give you a little bit of background. But I work in the deepest possible level of trance. And the other methods always say, don't go there. Don't work in the deep level. Strange things happen there. If you read my books, you know strange things happen there. But to me, that's where all the information is and all of the knowledge. So I'd rather work in the deep level. You get the conscious mind out of the picture. It cannot interfere. And it is like going through time in a time tunnel. The person is there. They are that person. Anything in our time period that did not exist in their time period, they won't even know what you're talking about. They are totally there. So to me, as a curious person, that was really a wonderful way to research history. Now, people say they think I'm a psychic or a channel. I'm not. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I consider myself to be the reporter, the investigator, the researcher of lost knowledge. Because as I did this work, I began to get information that had been lost, never known, or forgotten. And I was supposed to bring it back into our time period. That's where my books are. They keep coming, and more information is there. But where my information comes from, and where the healing in my work comes from, is this power that I'm telling you about. That's why I said having a past life regression, anybody can do it that knows how. That's the tip of the iceberg. You're going to get some information, but you're not going to get what is very possible. And that's why I go to this other source. The part that I get my information from, I call it the subconscious. But it's not the subconscious the way it's defined by psychiatrists. That's the childish part of the mind. That's the part of the mind that you use when you're doing habits, stop smoking and lose weight. That's not the part that I work with. I call it the subconscious because I didn't know what else to call it. It began coming through over the years, and then I found a way to call it in, and now I work with it constantly. But you may say, if you want to define it, you may say it's the oversoul, the higher self, the higher consciousness. It is so big and so huge, it has the answers to everything, and it's total knowledge. It is so full of love. It's so big, but yet it cares about each and every person. It's beautiful to work with. And this is where the healings come from. I'm not doing any of it. I'm just a facilitator. But I see miracles every day in my office now because I found a way to call it in during the session, and it does the healing. And I've seen it happen instantly in one session. I have people coming now from all over the world just for a session. And I would encourage that because, that's a long way to come. I see lots of cancer cases. I call them they, because I asked them one time, who am I speaking to? What is this? And they say, you may want to say we are the collective. I said, that sounds like the Borg on Star Trek. We're the collective, we are a group. And people say, well, maybe you're speaking to their guides and guardian angels. No, the guides and the guardian angels have a purpose, but they're down here. You can get information from them, but not this kind of information. And they say, maybe you're speaking to the ascended master. That's not what it is either. Because I've been told the ascended masters are just like you. They're beings, they're people. They're the ones who, if you got enough knowledge, they don't need to come back to Earth anymore. They are over there and doing their job, but they're still in that other part. What I'm speaking to is way, way above that. And it is full of love. When I work, you can feel the love in the room. In my classes now, we have a website where they can interact and talk to each other, so they're never left alone out there. If they have difficulty in cases, they can talk to each other and ask for advice. And we just had one come the other day. People say, if they take your class, can they do what you do? They can. Because one of them on the website said, when I'm working with the subconscious, they said, I want to get on my knees. It's so powerful and so full of love. And she said, I've seen what they can do. And the energy is tremendous. And that's what I'm working with all the time. And I think it comes over on me because I'm in that energy all the time. But over the time, I did the UFO work and ET work for 25 years. And I got a lot of information there because I was speaking directly to the ET. But then it began to go into this more complicated information. And that's when I started writing the convoluted universe theory, because it was going beyond UFOs. And that's when they began coming in and giving us this more complicated metaphysical theories and concepts. They have told me all of your questions will never be answered. Some knowledge is a poison rather than medicine, because the human mind is incapable of understanding it. There is nothing in the human mind that can handle the totality of all of it. It's way, way beyond it. They said it's not the human brain, it's the mind. They can give us some things, they can give us information, and they do the best they can. I'm so full of questions. I want to know everything. And they make jokes about that. I see, how can this be a fake or fraud? And I get accused of everything when it happens to every single person that comes to see me. And I see thousands and thousands of people. It's always the same voice, always the same terminology, the same phrases, and they go to work instantly. So we've tapped into something that knows every single one of you, knows all about you. There are no secrets at all. That's how it knows why you have the problem and it can handle it. But that's the part that I work with. And I see lots of cancer patients, they dissolve the tumors instantly. This is what's amazing. I see this happen again and again and again. But see, first you have to find why this happened. Because, you know, the ideal state of the human body should be perfect health at all times. You should never, ever be sick. The human body is a miraculous machine that has been created to take care of itself and heal itself if we don't interfere. That means the doctors are not necessary. I have doctors coming to me as clients. I have psychiatrists coming. Every walk of life you can possibly imagine. Everybody's got problems. And people are very complicated. That's what I do, is the counseling and the therapy with them. But we're finding out that a lot of these doctors are telling me they're getting out of the medical profession and going over into alternative and natural healing, because that's where it is. And I'm working with doctors now all over the world. I teach a class at the college in New Mexico that is involved with alternative healing. So this is, to me, is the way we're going. This is they say the therapy of the future is the natural. So if you make yourself sick, your mind is that powerful. It's also powerful enough to heal you. First, you got to find out, why did I do this to myself? And people tell me, I don't want to be sick. What do you mean? Every illness you have created yourself. You've done it. And that's what we find out is why. Why did I do this to myself? What am I trying to tell myself? Every ache, pain, symptom is a message to you. It's trying to tell you something. You got to find out, what is it trying to tell you? And when you find out, it's going to go away, because why should you keep trying to give you the message once you've already received it and understood it? This is the way it works, and it's miraculous. I've had people come who were, a lot of them come that are scheduled for surgery, because they say no surgery, no invasion of the body is totally unnecessary. And they, of course, they say once something's been taken out, we can't put it back. If we can get it before it's taken out. And they also say no drugs. Every drug has a side effect. That's why they encourage the use of natural herbs and minerals and things like that. And this is what I mean. I'm working with the natural doctors, and we have in our office, on our Rolodex, the numbers of people who have left the medical profession and opened their own natural health clinics. So people do call us for references. But once you understand all of this, this is what I work with. And we do go to the past life, because sometimes we get information and they're just going to help the person. But it's not all there is. When we get to them, then everything is done. And this is where the information comes from that I write about. And it doesn't come through one person. It comes through many, many, many people. To me, it's like putting a puzzle together. I'll get one piece of information from one person, another piece from somebody else, and then eventually it begins to all make sense and I'll get the whole story. And this has been happening for years. And if you read The Convoluted Universe, this is where all of a sudden the session will not be past lives. It'll be going to a place where this information has come through. It's what's best for the person, but also it's giving me the information they want me to pass on. To show there's no way this could be made up, I would be in England doing a session with someone. They never interrupt the therapy part. They always try to take care of the person. But towards the end of the session, they'll say, Dolores, this is the next piece of information you need for your next book, the next theory. And they'll give me something I've never heard of before. And if I don't understand it, I'll say, can you make it a little clearer? Because they say our minds are incapable of handling it. I said, well, give me an analogy. Give me something so I can understand what you're trying to tell me. And they do the best they can in our limited human language. They go with symbols, with mind to mind. It's much easier. So they said, we'll do the best we can. So give me some information. And this is the next concept, and it'll always be something I haven't heard of. Then maybe a week later, I'll be back in the States doing another session with somebody else. They'll happen again. They'll come through at the end of the session, continue talking about what they have done the week before. So they expand upon the knowledge and the information they want me to have. That's why it takes a while to get all the pieces together. And if you've read the Convoluted Universe books, you know it's what it is. I try to put several sessions together on the same subject. But it's amazing the information that keeps coming in. This is where the Convoluted Universe book came from. Each one's a little more complicated and a little more complicated as I got more and more information. When I got to the end of Convoluted 3, if you read that one, I was going to end it with a chapter that was called The Final Solution. What was going to happen if we didn't get our act together? That there are souls on Earth who are here to destroy all of us if we don't get our act together. And I mean, these are people who have no knowledge of these things consciously. It's their contracts they came in with, and it's in the subconscious level. And so they're as amazed as anybody when this information comes out. Well, I was going to end the book with that, and my daughter Julia said, no, that's too negative. You need to end it on something that's more hopeful. Although the book was already getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, that book ended up being 700 pages. Well, the next week, I was in Montreal, and they came through and took over the entire session, and they gave me the last chapter with the absorption. And there was also information I'd never heard before. But at the end of the chapter, I said, well, I don't think there's anything left that you can tell me, because they keep expanding my mind. And because what I'm getting now, I could never have understood when I began 30 years ago. They are so wise. They said, if we can't give it to you all at once, they drop a little crumb, digest it, one little spoonful, then they move on, give you a little more. Once you digest that, give you a little more. And that's how it's been all this time. What I'm getting now, I would never have understood at the beginning. I would have just thrown it away and said, no, it doesn't make any sense. But they're very wise about that. So at the end of that chapter, when I said, I don't think there's anything left you can tell me, they said, oh, there's more. There's more. And I ended that book at that. There is more coming. During one session, one of the most common questions, I call it the eternal question that everybody wants to know that comes to see me. They all want to know, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Am I on the right track? Some people are worried that they're running out of time and they're not going to be able to do their purpose. And they will tell the person if it's appropriate, because sometimes it's not time for you to know, and everything has to have its time. And one man, I always tell them that, they'll tell you if it's appropriate. This one man wanted to know what his purpose was. They came through and said, we can't tell him, it's not time. But they said, oh, we wish we could. You don't know what we see. But they said, consider he's where you were 20 years ago. You don't give a baby a 3-course meal. You give a baby milk, and you give a baby cereal, crushed vegetables. You don't give a baby a steak. So you have to go slowly. That's what I mean by spoon feeding. That's why I didn't think people could understand the Convoluted Universe series, because they were full of such complicated concepts. But people said they don't care, they don't understand that, they make them ask questions. So that's where it just keeps going in that direction. There are times I wish we could go back to the simpler days when it was the history that I was working on. I got tons of information that will be books down the line on history the way it really was. That's a book further on. I love that, but they're going into these other directions, and I have to follow where it is. I'm working on Convoluted 4 now. People keep saying, you got enough information. It pours out of people. I have enough information for 3 more books. That's the problem. It's too much. So I'm trying to decide to compartmentalize it. Is it going to go in this book or that book? But there is enough for Convoluted 4, and there's more concepts that we haven't even approached. Some of them I'll be talking about tonight. But it just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. So there's a psychiatrist with Freud and Young. I was going to say Young instead of Young. When he was doing his work in the very, very beginning of psychiatry, he was using hypnosis. And he discovered what he called the universal consciousness. I think this is the same thing, except that when he found it, he was afraid of it. He stopped his work. And he never did
20
hypnosis again. He went over into
20 to
the theory of
20 and a half.
psychiatry and developed that branch instead. If only he had stayed with this, I think we would have been much further ahead by now. But he didn't know what he was dealing with, and it was very frightening. But I'm just so curious. And I love the energy, so that's the part I'm working with. Okay. So the part we're going to be focusing on tonight is what I've been lecturing about lately. I've gone away from the Nostradamus prophecy because I lectured on that for 20 years. My books are the only ones that have ever translated and interpreted all 1,000 of the prophecy. It's the most accurate interpretation that's ever been written. It took 3 years to do it, and direct contact with Nostradamus himself as she was writing them. Fantastic story. And for 20 years, I was lecturing on that all over the world. But he kept saying, this, I'm telling you, is the worst. This is the worst case scenario. This is what would happen if you don't do something to stop it. That's what he was telling us this for. And he wanted me to go all over the world and tell people the power they had to change these predictions. He said, if you know which path you're going down, you can do something to stop it with the power of your mind. Because he said, you don't realize the power of your mind. And if the power of one man's mind is powerful enough to change something, imagine the power of your mind. Because it's not only multiplied, it is squared. And the power is tremendous. That's why he wanted me to go places and tell people they have metaphysical groups, they have prayer groups, any kind of a group. If they could just take 5 minutes out of their meetings and focus on peace and harmony, that would be the world we would create. So that's what I was doing all that time. And I think we've made a difference because the worst has not happened. He saw time as not a straight line. He saw going off in many different branches of all the probabilities and possibilities that are possible, from the worst to the least of any situation. It all depends on what people do. The same is true in your life. You come to crossroads and you know you took one branch of your life would be totally different than the other branch. That was what he saw. He saw all of the possibilities. If you knew which line you were traveling down and knew where it was going, you could make changes by focusing on the opposite of what you saw. So that was what I was doing all these years. And according to the prophecies, we should have been in a terrible war with the Middle East by the beginning.
Helen Hansel was able to win any competition she took part in. She was known as the contest queen because
beginning of the year 2000. Well, it hasn't happened. We did go to war, but I believe now we went into one of the lesser paths that we saw. People say, well, they didn't come true. I think that they did. We just went into another timeline that's taken us away from that. So now we're headed into the time of the great genius and the time of computers and all those things we saw about computers and the world we're going into and the new world. We saw all of that. That's where we're heading now. And I think we've avoided the worst that we were headed down before all of this happened. So anyway, where's I going with all of that? That was what I was focusing on all that time. But now, the information we're getting, we are going in a different direction. And what I'm lecturing on now and what I'm doing on the Coast to Coast, people have heard me on there. We talk all night long on the radio. And believe me, that's a long time. At least they have commercial breaks. And I just did the Project Camelot too, and they wanted me to focus on the 3 waves of volunteers. So that's the ones I'm going to be talking about tonight, are the 3 waves. And this took a long time to get all the pieces. It's scattered throughout the Convoluted Universe book, as I got little pieces of what it was all about. And then it's only been over the last year or so I began to get more pieces that ties the whole story together. So in order to explain all of this, I've got to go back to the beginning of the world. It's a long way. But you all understand where I get my information from now. I have a memory that never forgets anything. So I have to have all of this information, all of these parts, and be able to remember it all and then put it together and refer back and forth between the different books. So maybe that's why I'm supposed to be doing this. I don't know. But I have such a curiosity about history. I want to know everything. So maybe that's, if I got chosen for this or whatever you want to say, I can't get out of it now, that's for sure. Okay. The information goes back, and it's in Keepers of the Garden, is where we had the first information about the seeing of the planet Earth and where we all came from. And then the Custodian is the story of my 25 years working with UFOs and ETs. They expand upon this information because they said you must know the story of how life began on Earth. So I'm going to have to go back to that for us. You'll understand what's happening right now and why we're going into the new Earth and what's happening to the people in 3 ways and all fits together. Well, in the beginning of life on Earth, they said there are councils. There are councils over planets. There are councils over solar systems. There are councils over galaxies. Each one of them has rules and regulations that they live by. Nothing is random. Everything is very regulated out there. So they keep watch over all of the planets. So you can imagine what a job that would be. They keep track of everything. And they said in these councils are the history of all the planets. They said when a planet reaches a point where it can support life, that's a very momentous time in the history of that planet. And at that time, they get to decide what kind of life are we going to introduce on that planet. And I think with this kind of a group, you can follow these things because people say, what does God have to do with any of this? God is very much involved too. It's the evolutionary theory and the creation of theory mixed together, and it all fits beautifully the way they explain it. But when I've had people in sessions go back to when the Earth was forming, and whenever the volcanoes were erupting, there was no life on Earth. There was just too much ammonia in the air. I had them go back to those times and tell me what the life was like at that time. I've had them go to the times whenever life was being created. Many of you probably had these past lives too, but you don't remember these things on a conscious level. I've had them go where they were helping form the ocean, form the first life. Because we've all been creators. We've all been parts of this. We just don't remember because you're focused on this life right now. But if it's important for the person to know, it will all come out. So I think I'm not going against the belief systems, and just stay with me on this. So when they said the planet got to the point it can support life, there is a group that was called the archaic ones, the ancient ones, have been around forever. They are the ones who began the seeding of the planet Earth. They did it because in their beginning, that's how they started. Someone came and seeded life on their planet. And when they got to the point that they could travel in space, they began going through the galaxies, planting seeds also, and developing razors that got to the point where they could carry on the work. Eventually, we're going to be involved in the same thing. And you know, with the curiosity of our scientists, if they find a planet out there they think can grow something, you know they're going to do it. And they said we will be a very welcome addition to what they call the Federation because of our curiosity and our creativity. So we will all be a part of this at the time. I've had people go back to when they were there, when the Earth was being down, when the oxygen, the ammonia in the air was being taken out so that life could form. First you had to have the atmosphere, then you had to have the water, then you had to have the plants. And they were there doing all of these steps. Many of these people have gone to lives where they were the seeders, the planters. And other ones have gone to lives when they were the recorders, where they had to go back and see how things were advancing, how they were developing. All of this must have taken millions of years. But this is part of what they do. They go throughout the galaxy checking on all these different things. I'm not to say too much on one subject here, but it's quite complicated. Okay, so I asked them one time, where did the cells come from that began the whole thing? They said it doesn't matter. They come from everywhere. As they travel through the universe, they are collecting cells. They're collecting sperm and ova to be used in these projects down the line. This is part of what they do. They collect animals. They collect everything because they will be used for future seedings of other planets. And when they first brought the cells and put them on Earth, the idea was to get it to develop into a multi-celled organism to start dividing. They didn't care what it was going to develop into. They didn't care what it was going to look like as long as life would be established on Earth. Because it all depends on the primeval soup in the atmosphere and the chemicals on what anything is going to look like. They told me one time, you'd be surprised what you could have looked like. But the species develops according to the line it goes. We developed along the mammal line. Other planets develop along the reptilian line or the insectoid line. It doesn't matter. Some of them are combinations of different types. We developed along the mammal line. But they bring in the cells and they get them to turning into multi-celled organisms. They come back from time to time checking on everything. And they say, you have no idea how fragile life is. Because sometimes they would come back and it had been developing, something was beginning to form, and then they would come back and check on it again, and it had all fallen apart and died. They said life is so fragile. They have no idea how important life is and how delicate it is. If they can get it going and keep it going. So then it begins to develop into plants, animals. I'm going to condense a great deal here, because I've done lectures on this for many hours. So it develops into animals eventually. Then it came to the point they were going to have a human. Something that had knowledge and intelligence. So, like I said, we were going along the mammal line. So they picked the ape because it had a large brain and also because it had hands. It had to have hands that would be able to make tools to create a civilization. So there was a lot of work done to train the ape with the genetic manipulation of the genes and to develop it into a person. They said you will never ever find the missing link. That's because it's jumped generations. Because it just happened so fast. And this is what the scientists can't understand. Even Darwin said he understood evolution through the animals and the plants. When they got to man, it didn't make any sense at all. But that was when it jumped. So when they finally developed an intelligent human being, something that could begin to build cities and plants, then they knew they had to come and live among the developing species. No species ever just came out of the jungle and decided they're going to start planting or start building houses. They're out there hunting and gathering. So when they came and lived among the people, this is where your legends of the gods came from. They lived as long as they wanted. And they lived with the people to give them the knowledge they were going to need as they went along. Every culture in the world has the legend of a culture bringer. And the culture bringer always comes from the sky or from across the water. They all have, the Indians have their corn woman who brought them corn. The other ones have the ones who bring them fire. They all have these gods that they worship because they live there. And I've had people go back to those times and they say, why do they call us gods? We're just beings. And they were just there to make sure everything was going okay. This was supposed to be a planet, a beautiful, beautiful planet with a species that would never get sick and never grow old. It was supposed to be a perfect species. Maybe that's where the idea of the Garden of Eden came from. I don't know. But it was supposed to be a perfect species. And we said, give this beautiful people intelligence and free will and see what they do with it. Many planets in the universe don't have free will. I've had people go to those planets, and it's a totally different way of living if you don't have free will. Some of them are really glad to get out of that life because they're not at all what you think. But free will is very important. So they said, we cannot ever go against the free will. So they give us free will. That's what was supposed to happen. We were never supposed to grow old. We were never supposed to die. We were never supposed to get sick. But something happened that spoiled the plan. A meteorite hit the Earth. And when the meteorite hit the Earth, it brought in bacteria for the first time that created disease. Before that, there wasn't anything. And they were heartbroken. There was a show on Nova years ago where they were talking about the different kinds of life on Earth. They said there's two kinds of life on Earth, bacteria and everything else. That the bacteria was the foreign element that didn't belong. And this is what created disease. But when this happened, they said, what are we going to do now? They went back to the councils. They had the meeting. And there was great sadness in the councils. It was like, well, what do we do? Do we wipe the whole thing out and start all over again? Or do we let it continue to develop the way it is, knowing it will never be the perfect people we expected it to be? It was decided that so much work had been done to allow it to continue to develop, even though they knew it would never be perfect. Now, see, a lot of this I think you would go along with if I do UFO lectures on why they're doing the experimentation for the sperms and the ova and all of that. They are bringing us back to the perfect state we are supposed to be. You understand all of these things. There's no negativity in what any of them are doing. They're taking care of us since the beginning of time. One time they said in one of those sessions, why do people keep saying we're here to take over the world? It's ours. It always has been. We can't do anything to you as bad as you do to yourself. So they've been watching us all this time and taking care of us. And as they lived with the people, they were given these different inventions and things as the time was right. Fire, agriculture. When the species got to that point, they would give them the next invention. Of course, now it's got to the point they can't live among us anymore. There's too many people. So now when the next invention is supposed to be developed, it's put into the atmosphere. They don't care who invents it as long as it is invented in the timeline. And, you know, you always hear about people all over the world are all working on the same invention at the same time. This is why. They put it out there. Whoever gets it, that's fine with them. That's the way they're doing it now. But I asked them one time, I said, okay, they said we have free will. And then the prime directive of Star Trek is very, very real. Non-interference. You cannot interfere with a developing species. So I said, all right, you're coming and giving these things to the people. Isn't that interference? They said, no, that's a gift that we give them when the time is right. What they do with it is up to them. And a lot of times they don't use it the way we wanted them to use it. They'll turn it into a weapon or they'll use it in a negative way. But it was intended for good. So it gets to that point, they give you a gift. I said, well, can't you come back and tell them you're not doing it right? It was not what it was intended for. They said, that is interference. Give it to you once and see what you do with it. If you don't use it in the right way, then nothing they can do about it because that was the interference. So many times they sit there and shake their head. They said, for goodness sake, you know, what are you doing this for? We give it to you for a good reason and you're turning around and using it like this. This is important for you to know so you can understand the three ways. Anything that is supposed to be developed will be developed in the proper time because they know when the civilization needs the next information, the next invention, the next step up the ladder. Well, if you understand, they've been watching us since the beginning and taking care of us. When we dropped the atomic bomb at the end of World War II, that really got their attention. They've been watching us all during the war, so they can't stop the wars. They can't stop everything we're doing. They're just watching. They're watching us all during the war. Well, here at the end of the war, we developed atomic power. And what do we do with it? We go and make a bomb. That got their attention. They said, we better get down there and see what these kids are up to. And they were very unhappy about it because it was not supposed to be in our timeline yet. When it was time for it to be developed, it was supposed to be developed for peace, for energy, for electricity. It was not supposed to be used for a weapon. But once you create something for negativity, it has that, what we call aura of negativity around it, and it will never really be what it was supposed to be. But they said they're really worried about it because they said these kids don't know what they're playing around with. They just came through this horrible war. They can't take care of themselves. They have no idea what they're doing. Now they bring up atomic power. They can destroy the world. They have no idea what they're working with. See, I left the piece out there. It's going to come back to me. Okay. I have all this information flooding into my head, and you have no idea the energy that's coming off the audience too. That's the reason I sit down. I'm a smaller target that way. Okay. But you see, humans have been on Earth for so long, making the same mistakes over and over and over. We're caught on the wheel of karma, and they know it. They said you can't even figure out your own lives. You got the country in a mess. You just came through this war because people go through the same lives over and over again, making the same mistakes. The karma over and over and over. They don't learn. They got to keep coming back to do it over again. If Jesus came to save us from anything, what I found out was he came to save us from the wheel of karma. Because we were just going round and around and around, making the same mistakes instead of moving up the ladder. And he was to show us how to live through love. But people didn't understand it and they killed him. So here we're going life after life after life, being round and around, making the same mistakes over and over again with the same people. They said these kids can't even take care of their own lives. They can't take care of the world. They're never going to be able to understand atomic power. They will blow up the world. Now, the law of non-interference just goes so far. They are not allowed to interfere unless we get to the point we could destroy the world. If that were to happen, it would cause reverberations throughout the whole solar system and into other parts of the galaxy. You have no idea what it would do if this. I said, this little planet. We're isolated over here on purpose. We're a young planet. They want to keep us away from everybody else. They don't want us to contaminate the rest of those planets. But if this little insignificant planet were to destroy itself, it would send reverberations out, and it would also go into other dimensions and interfere with lives of other people on other planets. That it would be like undeclared war. You can't even begin to believe the reverberations it would have if something happened to this planet. So they said that the only way they could ever interfere was if we reached the point we were going to destroy the world, then they would have to step in. This has happened countless times through history, and I'm going to be going over some of that. Oh, but they've always been there. This is the thing. So they knew that the atomic power was so dangerous in the hands of children that we could misuse it and destroy the world. They said, what are we going to do now? We can't come in and say, stop it, you can't do it. That's interference. They came up with what I thought is a brilliant plan. They went back to the councils, they had meetings on this. They said, all right, we can't interfere from the outside. Maybe we can influence from the inside. So they came up with a brilliant plan. The people on Earth aren't doing it. They're too stuck in karma, too stuck on the wheel. We're going to have to bring in other souls that have never been here before and that are not stuck on the wheel of karma. Those are the ones we're going to have to bring in. Fewer souls, never been contaminated by Earth before. So that was what they decided to do. And the call went out for volunteers. And I've had hundreds of these sessions, and I've written about them in the books about, I find one here, one there, and that's why the whole story is coming together about the three ways. Now, none of you know this consciously, but now that it's coming out in my radio shows and the Project Camelot in the books, I get emails all the time saying, I'm first wave, I'm second wave. Now it makes sense. I finally understand. But on your conscious level, you don't understand. You don't know what in the world's going on. Okay. The call went out. Earth is in trouble. We need souls to volunteer and come and help. Will you help Earth? And I've had many, many sessions when some of them are at the meetings they're holding in the spirit world on all different parts. And they get down here and they say, what was I thinking? This is horrible. What was I thinking about? But what I have found, these volunteers are coming from two different places. Before, all those years, when I would take people into past lives, it would be normal past lives. I have people go back to their animals too, which I still consider that normal. Animals, birds, plants, rocks, even rocks of consciousness, everything has consciousness. When I have somebody go back to where they're a rock, they say life is very slow. But in the last book, I talked about a whole lot of life as animals. But these, I want to know how the animal thinks, how it sees, how it perceives things. My curiosity again. So those were normal minds. They were all going back to lifetimes where they had lessons they had to learn with people now, karma with different people in their lives, their families, all of this. So that was what my therapy was all about. I find out the cause of your problem. I get people with family problems, physical problems, job problems, and that's where it was going all these years. Now, in the last several years, things have changed. The only ones I'm finding now who are going back to normal past life are those that still have karma to repay. The other ones are coming up with something totally different. Now, how can you explain this? That happens again and again and again. They go to two places. Some of them were ETs, they don't like that term, on other planets, spaceships, other planets, other dimensions. Some of them lived in places where they were light bodies. They didn't even have a body. Imagine how to get that far advanced and then to volunteer to come down here. And they have never been on Earth before because they've always lived on other planets and other dimensions. Then we have some who have never been anything. They have never left God before. And this is tremendous when I have these sessions with these people. Would you imagine what a shock it would be to these souls? They're so pure and they're so unaffected by our junk here. They come into this life. It's very difficult for them to function here. But when I've had them go back to God, they call it the source. They always say the source. They always describe it the same way. And I have a whole section in the last book on what God and what the source is. In my book, Between Death and Life, was the first time I ever got someone going back to God. And they were explaining about, they said, you have no idea what God is. Your perception of God is like a tiny thread compared to what it really is. You have no way of understanding what it is. And then they say, think of those people who do not have as much understanding as metaphysical people do. Their concept of God isn't even as much as a tiny thread. It's no way of understanding the totality of the whole thing. Well, first of all, God is not a man. This is what some of the speakers have been talking about the whole time here. God is not a man. You've got to get over that. If anything, he would have been a woman. Because women are the creative force. He's neither one. He does not have a gender. He's not male and he is not female. It is a power. It's an energy that is absolutely incredible. Every one of them have gone back to him, describe it as a huge, bright light. Some of them say, I'm in the sun, but it doesn't burn. It's not like being on fire. It's like being in a huge sun. Some of them describe it as the great central sun. But it is always described as this huge, enormous light, a pulsating light. And when they're there, it is so full of love that they don't want to leave. And they are always together with all these other, what do you want to call it, beings, souls, essences, however you want to say it. And they're happy. They don't want to leave. There's time to go back into how life got created in the first place, when it came from God. I have all of that in the book too. I guess maybe I could say a little bit. Whenever God was this huge bright light. And when he decided, he knew everything, but he was lonely. But he wanted to create others. This is when he burst out. This is the Big Bang theory. When he burst out into all these millions and millions of particles. Now, when I take you back to what you really, really are, all you are is a tiny little spark of light. A tiny little spark, that's all you are. So in that point, they all shot out in all directions. Some of these little sparks became planets, some became galaxies, and many of them became the individual souls. I have many clients that come in and say, I want to know where I came from. That's when we all came from the same place. And they think they came from a planet out there or something. No, they all came from God, from the source. And when they shot out, it was like God said, go and learn, my children. Learn everything you can and bring it back to me. When Mandy was talking about the supercomputer, it's really very much like that because he collects information. He wants to know everything. This is why there is no bad, there is no good. It's all information, experiences, and learning. So everything you ever learn in any of your lives, at the end, when you graduate, you bring it all back to God. It's kind of like download. So anyway, this is how we all began on our journey. We are like cells in the body of God. We will return with all of the information. So these people went back to life, which I didn't think was possible to never have a life anywhere. In my early days, I wouldn't have believed it. But they were with God. And they were very, very happy. They didn't want to go. Because when they leave, they said it's this feeling of separateness. And it's very traumatic. They don't want it. They're away from God. And you go your whole life lonely, they want to go back to be with God. So they have been separated. So when they're telling me all these things, and I'm thinking, well, you must have left because here I'm talking to this body laying on the bed. I said, well, why did you decide to leave? They said, we heard the call. And even when these, all of this, they always say the same thing. We heard the call. Earth is in trouble. We need volunteers. We need come and help. And out of their love, they said, we will go and help. Not knowing what they were getting into. I've had some of them say they were warned. They've tried to tell them this is not going to be what you think it's going to be. But if you really want to go and help, you can do it. So they came into the bodies. And sometimes when they get into the body, they're saying, what were we thinking of? So everything is so dense and heavy on Earth that they really don't want to be here. So this is what I found now, or what I call the 3 waves, because they've come in at different times. And this was the experiment to see, because Earth would really need help. The first wave would be those born right at the end of the Second World War. Right about the time I said when they discovered that we dropped the bomb, we didn't need them at the energy. We couldn't handle it. That's when the new souls began coming in. which I used to say 50s. My daughter says, don't be too strict on these ages because we don't know. Some people tell me they're in their 60s and they think they are one of the forerunners because they fit the qualifications. But I would say nowadays, it's been about 60 years, hasn't it, since the end of World War II. So those age ranges are the ones who are the forerunners. These are the first wave that came in. Now, these, and I wrote about the first one was in Keepers of the Garden. First time I ever encountered anyone like that. I didn't know what to ask them. But now in the other books, I'm finding many, many of these because they're finding them everywhere. Okay, the first wave of people don't want to be here. They don't like it. They're very unhappy. They may have a good family, a good jobs, but they don't like Earth. They don't like the negativity. They want to go home. They don't know where home is. They just know it's not here. They don't like the violence because they think, why do people do things like that to each other? So it's very difficult for them to live here. And many of these people have tried to commit suicide to get out because they just can't take it. This is not going to solve anything. But I've run into many, many of these in my work. I've had people come in and say, when I leave your office, I'm going to commit suicide. You're my last hope. That puts a lot of responsibility on a therapist. But then we usually find out where it all came from. But I kept wondering, when I started writing these books 20 and 30 years ago, that was when we were having a lot of teenagers, they're having problems and trying to commit suicide. Maybe they were part of this first wave and they couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand being here. The second wave came later. Julie, what do you think? It's about 20s and 30s years old now? I mean, not 20s, 30s and 40-year-olds. And that's the second wave. The second wave are what I call the generators, the antennas, the channelers. They're here to just be. They're here to channel energy. They will affect anybody they're around. They said you could walk through a mall, a crowded place, and affect everyone that you walk by. Just from the energy generated from the person. This is helping everyone. Because I have people coming and they want to know their purpose. They want to know what they're supposed to be doing. They say you're not supposed to be doing anything. You're supposed to just be. Well, because they're not very happy with that. They want to know, what am I supposed to do? These people, the second wave, are very gentle. They're usually in the background. If they do get married, I found some that find another soul like themselves. They usually don't want children because they said to have children creates karma. They don't want karma. They want to do their job and get out of here. They don't want to stay here any longer than they have to. And they're afraid the children will tie them here. I've had some that have had children. It was very difficult. One woman had to stay in the hospital the entire term of her pregnancy because otherwise she would abort. They had to keep her on a drug that would keep her heartbeat at a certain level the whole time so she didn't have the child. And when the subconscious came through, it said, you don't realize this is the group that we're not supposed to have children. And it was very difficult for her to do this. But one thing I have found too, this first wave and some of the second wave, their energy is totally different from our energy of us earthbound on the wheel of karma. The energy is different. They're coming in for the first time into such a strange, dense, heavy world. So sometimes when they first enter the mother's body, enter the fetus, the energy is so different and so strong that the baby will abort because it can't match the frequency of the mother. And I've had some people tell me, that makes sense. My mother had a couple of abortions before, not, you know what I mean? Not legal, you know what I'm talking about, miscarriages before they were born. Because they said this is the difference in the energy adjusting to the person. So they said sometimes in order to get the soul in here, we can't put all of the energy of the total soul in at one time. We have to put a portion of it in so that the baby will survive and be able to be born. And then as it gets a little older, a little more of the soul will come into it. And I've had people come in and wonder, what's happening? Everything is so different at different stages in their life. That's because it's been downloaded more of their soul. But in the beginning, it's too strong of an energy for the mother to carry the baby. Does any of this make any sense to you? Because these are bits and pieces I've had to put together. So this is the energy that is in these two. And I asked them one time, why did the first group have so much more problems than the second group? They said they were the forerunners. They were the pioneers. Somebody had to come and blaze the trail. They had a lot of difficulties. Then the second wave could just follow in their footsteps and go after them. So that's why they had it easier with the second wave. And that's what people say, I know I'm first wave, I never wanted to be here. And they tell me, some of them say, I remember standing in the kitchen talking to my mother when I was about 3 or 4 years old, saying, I want to go home. And she said, well, you are home, honey. And I said, no, I want to go home. And they didn't understand what they meant. Well, the third wave are the new children. These are the ones who call the Indigo, the new children coming in that are considered the hope of the world. They're the gift of the future. They are coming in with everything in place. See, as we go through we're going into the new earth and everything, our DNA is being changed so that we can adapt to all the changes that are happening now. These children are coming in with everything in place. Everything is there. They don't have to have any changes made. They are ready and they're willing to go. This is why they're a totally different breed. And Nikki did a good job in her lecture talking about this group. You can understand how they are. I've lectured at conferences about the new children, and where there's been panels of these new children. And they explained it. They said, we're just bored is all it is. We did it the first time. Why do they have to keep telling it over and over again when we understand, if you know the answer? The teacher will ask them for the answer to a problem, maybe a mathematical problem, and they'll give them the answer. They say, how did you know that? I know it. That's not good enough. So naturally the kids get frustrated. But they said, we must not put these kids on medication. And this is what Nikki was saying. The medication will just dampen these abilities. But these are the hope of the world. And she was repeating what I've said in my lectures before. Give these kids challenges. They're just bored. Give them something else to do. Even a teacher, you just give the kids something to tear apart and put back together again. It's something to challenge their mind. So these are the three waves. And they've all come in here to help us to move into the new earth. Because we're all moving into it now. The vibrations and the frequencies are changing. We are moving into a new world. It's something that's never happened before in the history of the universe. Everybody's watching, all the other beings. This is the greatest show on earth. So they want to see, are we going to be able to pull it off? Are we going to be able to do it? Because it's never happened before. And this with these people, when I have them in session, they'll say, we've come to help the earth go through its next incarnation. The earth is a living being. It is moving. It is evolving. It doesn't care if we go with it or not. It's going to do its thing. If you want to go with it, we're just like fleas on a dog. It doesn't care. It'd rather get rid of it. But if we want to go with us, then we have to adapt, and our bodies have to change to move with it. Okay. There's one piece of information that I want to say that I just got a few weeks ago, and I'm still getting information of another group that I never knew about before. So I'm going to talk about it tonight for the very first time, anyway. You see, civilizations down through time have been destroyed because of man. You know, man always wants to go in there and control. And the civilization gets to the point where it has great knowledge. It can do anything with the mind. The minds are so developed, they can do anything. And then man will come in and destroy everything because of his greed and power. This has happened time and time again down through history. Atlantis was not the only one. It happened many, many times before that. In my books, I talked about all the other civilizations that have reached the peak that had to be destroyed because of what they were doing. They gave me some of this information because they said, you're getting to that point again. You have to know, you're getting to the point now where we could destroy the earth again. They can't allow it to happen. This is where all of this is happening to keep it from happening. But the one piece that they gave me that was different was about Atlantis. I've heard time and time again the reason it was destroyed was because mankind was misusing the crystal power. And they were directing it in the wrong way, and they were trying to develop more and more power. Another reason they said it went down was because of their experimentation. They were doing experiments by combining animals and humans. And this is going against the laws of nature. One of the speakers talks about creating slaves. That's what it was. They created the half man, half animal being and used them as slaves. All of the legends you have heard down through time of the half man, half animal, they were legends left over from Atlantis. That was where they were developed. It didn't come from Egypt and from Greece, but it was real in those days. They said you have to know these things because you're pushing it again. You're trying to do it again. You probably know that we are experimenting. They're trying to put animal pig parts into the human pig organs, and they said you can't handle an animal part in your body because your body will reject it. So they are introducing human cells into these pigs so that the organs will be what a human can handle, and they're going transplanting those into the human. Now, in the beginning, there was some scientists that said we don't want to do this because you don't know what's going to happen. You can eat pork, you can handle animals, but what would happen if you had an organ in your body where the blood was constantly coursing through it? They said you could create a disease that there wouldn't be any cures for. So for a while they stopped it and thought maybe we better look at this. But now they started in again. They said we're going to do it. That's always their answer. We don't care what's going to happen. We're going to do it. So this is what I was told. You're getting to this point again where you can destroy the earth, go the same way that Atlantis went. Well, my daughter, what's she over there? She's always asked questions about why, if we have free will, why can't we push the envelope? You want to come up here and say what you? No, you don't want to. We have a lot of discussions about when I come home and I say, I got a little more piece of information. She said, why couldn't they do this? They destroy their own country or something. What's wrong with that? It's free will. If you want to use crystal power, if you want to do these things. So there's always little question marks about that. What does this have to do with threatening the earth to where it could destroy the earth? Then we got the extra piece of information. We found, they said they didn't tell me this till now. We found out one of the things that Atlantis was fooling around with was what they called dark matter. And I'll probably get some more information But I'm thinking they might have meant antimatter. Because they said the scientists were trying to see if they could create their own universe. Try to see if they could create wormholes and make their own universe and use it like God. Does that sound familiar? Where scientists are fooling around now with the collateral, what they call it, the things they're making experiments with. They want to create wormholes. We're headed down the same thing. So they said Atlantis, they began experimenting with it. And it became so bad that it began collapsing the grids of the Earth. When that happened, the Earth could explode. And they said it was not only affecting the grids of the Earth and the DNA of the Earth and the DNA of the people, was also beginning to spread out and affecting the grids of the solar system and into the universe. So they had no choice. They said, we've got to stop it because all of this, I just got this information. I'm trying to understand it. It would be the implosion. At the beginning, it would be like a holding in on itself. There's a grid collapse. And that the Earth would fold in on itself, and then the galaxy, other planets in the galaxy, it would be such a domino effect that it could destroy the entire universe. This is why they said they had to come in and destroy Atlantis. So that makes sense. That's a lot more serious than I ever thought it had been before. They had to destroy the whole continent because they couldn't be allowed to go any further. There were some survivors, some of them went to Egypt and to South America. They're the ones that built the pyramids, so they have this knowledge. But it finally made sense. But another piece of this information is, these are called the keepers of the grid keepers. You're all that now. Your job is to help rebuild the grid because we're bringing back our psychic abilities. We're bringing back all the abilities we had in the past. And we have to rebuild the grids back to where they were. And this is why our DNA is being changed and developed as we go through all of this. So they said there are 10,000 souls that have come in with the job of the grid keepers to rebuild the grids of the Earth. And none of this is on conscious level. You're probably doing it when you sleep at night. You don't even know it. Because every night you go out of your body and do work. Somewhere in there, you're all doing work. Maybe you're one of the keepers, but 10,000 at least who are rebuilding the grids of the Earth. All of this is going to go in the new book. You see what I mean? Every time I think I've got it all, they throw something else at you. And it's never ending because of the information that's pouring out. Okay, just to go on for quite a while, but let me go to questions because otherwise I could take a lot longer about.
Okay. So here you have a different spin on the Indigo Children from Dolores Cannon, and saying that there are these different waves of souls coming to the Earth. Maybe I'm one of them. Maybe you're one of them. Who knows? And we're here to try and get things away from the path that Nostradamus was talking about and get it back toward something that made a lot more sense. Maybe this class is part of it. Who knows? I have no idea. Stephen.
Bart, I didn't catch where Indigo Children came from. Was that right in the beginning of that video? Because I didn't catch it.
It just comes from the aura around the indigo kids, that they apparently have more of an indigo aura than the rest of us, and that's distinctive.
They supposedly started incarnating in like the 70s.
Yeah, or yeah, the 70s, 80s,
And they're usually diagnosed, by mainstream psychologists as ADD and all
ADHD.
that. ADHD.
And what is the background regarding those who are able to see these auras? Who is able to see that?
There are many people, not me, that claim to do that are, shaman, male, female, whatever, that have this as an ability. I mean, Bruce, can you look at anyone's aura and see anything?
No,
Okay.
not colors. I know a friend of mine who can. She's a healer. She can. I haven't talked to her that much about it, but as
I
Many
mean,
years
the
ago.
aura is, I think, is also an indication of the, I want to say the archetype of that person, you know, of their inclinations is what I would say. So,
Well, in like Ayurvedic teachings, it's considered to be about the energy body.
Well,
Which
everyone has an energy body.
right, which extends beyond, it permeates the physical body and it extends beyond the physical body, and it overlaps into other dimensions. Like the chakras are thought to actually not really be in the physical dimension, but they're kind of side by side with organs, you know,
which is what Ron Cowan observed.
they
the
correspond
chakras-
to organs.
Yeah, the chakras are not in our three-dimensional space. But
Is there
there's,
supposed to be any kind of, for lack of a better description, personality types that are associated with different colored auras
yeah,
or behavioral issues or anything along those lines?
yeah. I mean, I'm told that I have an aura for compassion and for science and mathematics. Okay.
And what color might that
No
be?
color.
Extra ones.
I missed that, Marjorie. Extra ones what?
Extra auras, extra halos, like
Yeah. Yeah. Most people have apparently like 3 crown chakras. Okay. I have 5. And I asked Ron Cowan, what are the other 2? And that's what he told me.
I think he was trying to say you have a swelled head.
Well, it's above my head. It swelled so much, it swelled up here.
So could one take the leap to say that affinity people inclined towards affinity groups or whatever would have similar auras? The blue people, the red people, etc.
Yeah.
I think sometimes they're complementary too, you know, that different vibrations are attracted to each other too, to in order to balance one another and learn from one another.
Called harmony.
Yeah. But the whole point in this indigo thing and these waves was these other souls coming to Earth to try and help Earth to dig out of the hole that it's in, and to become more enlightened and more compassionate and more loving, and so forth. And we'll see what happens.
When I was about 40, I was involved with a guy in New York who had a son who was about 4, 5, who was just amazingly precocious and different. I mean, he was different from anybody I'd ever met. And he could just instinctively relate to the computer. Somebody gave them an old Apple. So this was in like the late,
Apple II?
Yeah, in the late 90s. And so the father, Jim, had created some little object, some little kind of cartoon object. And his son, Jackson, said, well, aren't you going to fill it in? Why don't you fill it in? And he said, and the father, Jim, said, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to fill it in, but I don't see how to fill it in. So the kid said, well, why don't you use the paint bucket? And Jim looked at all the tools were right there. And he said, well, which one is the paint bucket? And the kid took the mouse and pointed to the one that was the paint bucket that would fill in this object, and it worked. He was like, I think he was like in kindergarten. It was like he was hardwired to work with computers. And his father was bright, and very innovative and creative, but he couldn't figure it out. And the 5-year-old was showing him how to do these things.
Well,
And
that's become increasingly commonplace.
right. And I think that was kind of a trend. And this kid was just, after a while, I was realizing from my dreams and things that the real relationship for me was about the kid, and that he had such a special soul. And the father had gone through this very, messy divorce, and the kid was kind of a train wreck from it. And I would be picking him up at school because the mother wouldn't show up and things like this. And he was just so powerful. He was this powerful being in this little body. And he just had such a different way of connecting and relating and talking. And for a while, the father thought it was too much for him to be sorting out with his mother and with me in the picture. And the mother overheard him playing all by himself once. He was playing with these little, dolls, someplace like a sandbox. And he was kind of singing to himself, well, I have 2 mommies, which I thought was a brilliant way to resolve it in his mind. And she got really upset. The mother was really freaked out by that. But I thought it was such a nice solution for him to arrive at. So he kept us apart for quite a while. And after a while, I said, I thought that wasn't good for the kid. And so finally, Jim said, I have a surprise for you in the car, when he went to pick up Jackson for one of their visits. And Jackson said, oh my God, it's Marjorie, isn't it? It's Marjorie. And Jim said, I'm not saying you go and see. So he came charging up the street. This was in Brooklyn. He came charging up the street and ran to the car. And I was sitting with my, with my legs out toward the sidewalk, just to kind of sit outside while I was waiting for them to come back. And he was, 5, 6. And he said, Marjorie, I was overjoyed when I heard that you were going to be here. I was overjoyed. What 5 or 6-year-old talks like that?
It sounds like he was something of a savant.
Yeah, he was very different, and I felt that somehow we were brought together. At a certain point, I felt it was probably better to just let him go, especially because it made the mother so uncomfortable. But he was just so incredibly different and brilliant.
Well, one of the things I found rather interesting in that first video was talking to this guy who was a rapper, and he was asked about knowing other Indigo children. And he said, all of my friends are Indigo, all of these rappers, whatever. And that's why I was thinking of affinity groups, of whether there is, kind of a special communications and bonding and whatever all else goes along with that, based on whatever it is that's going on, call it an aura or whatever. So I'm curious about that. So the other thing that I find rather curious in this era of great scientific abilities to super analyze. If you have auras that are different colors, if we're presuming that the same laws of physics apply throughout, the realms of the universe, that would mean that there are different frequencies that are going on, and one would think there would be some mechanism of measurement of these things. So here I have my, equivalent to a Geiger counter or something that I, point at you, and now I can see your, your auras, or something like that. One would
Well,
think
there is something called, is it Carillion?
Carillion
photography?
photographs, are perhaps related to this. But you raise a good point, which is, it could be that these vibrations that we're talking about, these frequencies, are in other spaces than the ones that we're in. Okay, they're there, but how do we measure them if they're in a different space?
And does a different space equal a different dimension?
Yeah. No, another three-dimensional space side by side with us. But we can sense it in some ways, but how do we measure what's going on there? We can measure what's going on in our three-dimensional space, but that's what the challenge is. This is where people think that Tesla actually did a lot of this stuff, but he never wanted to disclose it because he felt it would be misused. And he was probably right.
Well, the place where my mind goes regarding things like this is that I'm inclined to think that in all arenas there are analogous things, to the next arena, so that especially like in the realm of mathematics, for example, where we have things of frequencies, for example, of simple ratios, we end up having relationships such as octaves or fifths or fourths that are relatively comforting, rather than they're consonant rather than dissonant. And as we have more complex ratios, we have greater dissonance, and that these frequencies really also relate to our kind of our perception of things, so that we'll perceive something as comforting or consonant, rather than irritating or what have you. And it strikes me that these things are generally measurable, and that if I'm able to perceive something that is in another dimension, why shouldn't a machine be able to do that? Why, what about my mind would allow my mind to do it, but not a machine to do it?
That's a great point. There's a lot of this discussion on this dark matter stuff suggests that the dark matter, interacts through gravitation, which is, a very, very weak force. But it's something that we can measure here, and we can see its impact there. But
I think we just need the instruments that have the bandwidth. Which we just don't necessarily have.
Yeah, but if the dark matter is in a separate subspace, which some people believe, then it's interacting, it's tugging away on the matter in our space. That's what many people believe is going on, but they're racking their brains for how in the world do we measure this? They're going crazy, over, we're indirectly sensing this, but we're not really directly measuring, what's going on. we're in part because we're in the wrong subspace.
Well, we need, like we need something that'll pick up those dog whistles that we just don't have the ears to hear,
Right, but they exist.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, for example, you'll have all of this, these phenomena of wild animals can detect, things like storms coming and whatnot.
Earthquakes.
Yeah,
Right.
earthquakes. Right. I mean, so theoretically,
They have some land that feels the pressure changing, and yeah, absolutely. Tsunamis, they seem to know when tsunamis are coming.
yeah.
They say the wise people notice when all the animals are running to the top of the island, and pay attention. But that's something that usually only the elders know to do. But yeah, they sense the pressure changes or something.
This is a topic that the best and brightest are going crazy everywhere on planet Earth, trying to figure out how to do exactly what you're talking about. And so far, we don't have anything publicly available we can point to for doing this. But
I
it
think
doesn't mean they aren't trying to do this.
I think there's always been practitioners, who cultivate. It's like cultivating organs. It's cultivating chakras, or your energy field, and being able to direct it and perceive.
So it just struck me. You said the phrase that it fits perfectly to where my thought was of energy fields. It strikes me that the only logical conclusion I can come to that is that if I have an aura of a particular color, it is because I am creating an energy field of a frequency that creates that color or colors. Okay. And it strikes me that if you have a particular, I'll call it behavioral a phenomenon such as ADD that is attributed to this particular indigo frequency, that if it's perceived as problematic, which generally speaking it is, that rather than I don't know, maybe taking Ritalin changes that frequency, or maybe there's a different mechanism to change the frequency, which would change the behavior. But it need not be medicine. I mean, who knows what might change that frequency? But the question is, what affects a cure, if you will? If you define a cure, meaning that the undesirable goes away and is replaced by the desirable. If that is how you define a cure, it strikes me that perhaps changing the frequency is what would be, the goal.
And we might be deadening, sensitivities or senses that are extra, that they make the person odd to the average culture, that we have, but maybe there's something wrong with our culture, not those people. Maybe we're deadening extra sensitivity that they have, that if it was encouraged and worked with, would be something, it would be a useful contribution that they could make.
I mean, you saw in the first video, the girl was an artist who was doing all these amazing artwork, and her mother never put her on Ritalin.
No, right. But there are, so I'm a great believer that that all of these factors that make us the individuals we are, feed or not, our creative expressions or abilities, to do things, what have you. The thing though is that everything is a trade-off. So perhaps the person who can be more creative might be less productive in more pedestrian ways, or what have you. And everyone would have to define for themselves what is desirable, rather than, from my standpoint, rather than having it imposed on a societal level with external judgments.
Right.
Sure.
Right, and having to fit this cookie cutter, When
Right.
I started doing charts for strangers, I was doing a lot of SIGGRAPH conventions. Have you ever heard of SIGGRAPH?
Special interest groups and graphics. So it was very active. It led with bitmap displays. There's a huge activity.
It was at the beginning of computer animation.
The
It was
80s and
just
90s. Lucasfilms came out of it. And
right, and so they would have these conventions in New York, and I was friendly with. I was out of Pratt Institute from Brooklyn, had a satellite office campus in Manhattan that I was going back to school for graphics in. And I was friendly with one of the women who was the host, and she was from the School of Visual Arts, from the SVA. And usually Pratt and SVA would kind of co-sponsor these things. And she and I really bonded. And she decided I should do chart readings for people at these things. And I was kind of billed as the cyber astrologer. And I had one of the first laptops, a Mac, the first Mac that had come out that anybody ever had. And I had the special paper printed on the back. And so I did a lot of spot readings for people. If they knew their time and date of birth, I could calculate it in, like 2 minutes on the computer. And sometimes I had a printer, sometimes I didn't. I could print it out for them, but I could at least look at it on the screen and show it to them. And what I learned was that the people who really excelled in multimedia had a particular kind of chart. And I was one, and it's called a scatter chart. We have planets everywhere. Some people are very focused, and some people are scattered, and it can be an extremely uncomfortable configuration to live with, because it's just so hard to focus on an interest, on a direction. As soon as you really start to do that, something will come along and throw you off.
And that's what they were saying again about the Indigo kids. They just couldn't
Right.
focus.
They're
They're very
scattered.
creative, very sensitive.
So I have one of these charts, and I realized part of my service to the planet was to talk with people who are, and to kind of give them permission that they didn't have to specialize. And so I read about, that became something I was especially interested in, was different types of charts as a whole. It's not your sun sign, it's not, anything that simple. It's the kind of chart you have. They can have different shapes, grand cross, grand trine, different, geometries. But that the scatter charts have a special curse in this day and age, because we're kind of expected to specialize. That's,
When you can't, when you really can't.
Highly prized.
Yeah.
But fate or whatever it is just will not allow certain people to do it. But we're branded as lazy and unfocused and underachievers. And I realized that my life really never would have made sense without computers. And so in another day and age, I would have just been lost. But
Well, the computer is really kind of a multiplier for your intellect. So you
Right.
can be scattered even more ways by going on the internet and really
But I
get defocused.
started working with computers when I was 19 in 1976. Nobody was doing computers then. And I
was.
started out, Bart was, I started out typesetting, and then I went into electronic page makeup way before Mac. And I started working at Time Inc. And we used a system called ATEX that was developed by a guy a couple of years ahead of Bart at MIT. And it had a mainframe and this incredible architecture for creating pages and graphics, like Mac, but way before Mac. But I was a programmer in that. It was routine programming. It wasn't any of the languages like Fortran or anything like that. But it was on the job training that like only people in the very upper echelon publishing companies had, like Condé Nast. The New Yorker used it, and all the Time Inc. magazines, and that's where I was. But then it ended up being the perfect background for learning astrology with a computer. You know, who knew? I mean, so I had no interest in astrology when I was 19. When I started setting type and doing paste up and learning about printing and fonts and all this. My parents thought I was out of my mind, but I really liked
Might not have been wrong, you know.
it. Maybe I was, but it turned out to be very useful and practical. And at that point, a boyfriend and I were publishing poetry books, that we were designing and producing. And the boss came to me one night and he said, "I know what you and Peter are doing." He said, "But I see you're buying your own paper. So that's okay." I appreciate it. He doesn't know that I know, but I'm telling you, I know what you're doing and it's okay. Which was very nice. This is this funny little printing company in Stanford. And he had been living in Boston and learned handset type and was doing poetry books up there. And here we met in this company in Stanford. But it was a quirky little niche that then got me into New York and Time Inc. But I was, a deeply entrenched Renaissance woman, living out of time, in this age of specialization. But when I worked at Time Inc., I did different things at different magazines. Sometimes I was a proofreader, sometimes I was a copy editor, sometimes I was a copy fitter, and sometimes I did page makeup. I did all these different things at the different magazines. And then I was handpicked for 2 different magazines where they wanted people to do everything. And it was a paperless operation. It was like way ahead of its time. It was very abstract, to do. Not everybody was capable of it. It was a really obscure skill set that was incredibly broad at the same time. And it was just, but I could feel like my synapses as a scribe from ancient times, with papyrus and quills and things. But that this was my niche. I was just really, really good at picking up typefaces, and I just loved them. I can't explain it.
Do you ever get into calligraphy?
Yeah, calligraphy. I just loved it. And at first, my parents thought it was such a waste until they realized, well, I was actually making money. I had good benefits, and it was quirky world of kindred spirits. They were very bright people. We
How
were
do you
all
feel?
overqualified, but it was a successful niche. A lot of us worked nights, so we could be free during the day. A lot of us were getting free tuition to, get, people were going to law school and getting PhDs and all kinds of things. With the Henry Luce, benevolent spirit of, it was very kind of paternalistic. They called it either the golden handcuffs building or the velvet handcuffs building,
So where do you think of yourself relative to ADD?
When I need to, I have incredible powers of concentration.
But
So I can, like to do that page makeup stuff, like I said, it was very abstract. You had to be able to think on a grid. And, everything was coded to a tenth of a point, it was like extremely precise and focused. But I can also be very diverse and scattered. So a lot of people looking at my life would say it was scattered, but the textbook teaching is, in the second half of life, it starts to come together. And it starts to make sense what you were doing at different periods of your life. And then with PCs and being able to have a computer in my own home that I could work on anytime, then things really started coming together with doing writing and design and graphics and collages that you could see like, oh, well, that's what was going on. But it looked like I was doing something completely different. That was a whole new tangent, looking at it sequentially. But then like every 10 years or so, it would come together in a new way. There'd be a new order to it. And that would feel really good when I was able to bring these, like apparently disparate parts together. That would be very healing for me.
interestingly enough, I had a totally analogous journey to that. Because I could not even begin to go into specializing. I am like the epitome of generalist. I've always enjoyed learning about and doing all kinds of stuff, and I kind of landed in a business which was a technical business that I had to learn all about how everything worked. Then I had to design and implement systems. I had to install them and maintain them and analyze them and design stuff, and the technology was always shifting, so I had to constantly learn and incorporate new technologies. That's what I established a relationship with AT&T, and they taught me Unix, and so I,
Did you know that?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that was,
It's just a matter of setting up the systems, and you'd have to do these shell scripts and all of that nonsense, and set things up, and so it was like one thing after another that lent itself to the fact that even though I never had a problem with focusing on what I needed to focus for however long I needed to focus on it, it's that something would catch my consciousness, and unless I didn't have a choice, I would turn on a dime and do the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. So I would always start off trying to prioritize, and then I'd quickly move on to the next thing, and just try to revolve around to be able to get what needed to be done. But being involved in tons of different things was what worked for me. I mean, this whole thing with my doing a musical, is that it does all of those things in spades, because like writing
You're doing
music
the lyrics and the music and
the book, and I have to figure out I have to learn new software for notation and arranging and orchestration, and I have to learn recording techniques to be able to do recordings, and not yet with this, but in terms of a business, it would be a matter of learning accounting and billing and HR, and I mean, it's just, the list is endless of different things that one has to learn to be able to do it, and
well, now I feel like it's time. I really want to look at your chart and see if you're one of these, if you're in this scatter tribe.
well, please do. I sent you my stuff. I'm eager to have you do that.
Okay, well, that would be interesting. But like Bart, who's also diverse, like things can boomerang into the other extreme sometimes. But he's got a really narrow focus, and his mind can be like a laser. And that's one part of Scorpio, is focus and concentration, and Pluto, and he has a really strong Pluto. I have a strong Pluto too, but I have a strong everything. But so in that way, we're like complementary opposites. But he's focused and drilled down, really deep, like more like with the microscope. And I've had more of the telescope. I'm always interested in the interrelationships and the generalities and the big picture. But something that I like about astrology is that's a way to talk about all of those things.
Yeah,
it gives you a vocabulary for it. And
so Steve's on the hook to send Marjorie his birth date.
I have it.
He has it.
He
Okay.
did it like a year or two ago.
Okay. Then it's time to go do it.
I hadn't felt up to it.
Okay, well, this is the time.
I think I'm getting better.
We just, there's a time and a place, so.
The thing for me, Marjorie, that the link that I have yet to be able to gain any comfort with is, I can't I can't link, whatever is in that chart to that is driving, my temperament and, my choices. That's the place where I have great difficulty.
Well, the Jungian approach is that it's not really driving it, it's describing it.
It's responding.
Yeah, it's happening all at the same time. One thing isn't causing another thing. So it's a way you can see it.
And it evolves.
But it's not causing it.
Yeah.
Except now my thinking is starting to change that in a way it is.
I don't see, just in terms of simple math, Bart, go with me here there. It's like if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So it's kind of like if the planets doing their thing at the moment of my birth are not causing things in my life to happen, and things in my life are just coincidentally happening, and somehow there's a link to the planetary movements. It's kind of like it's still, this equals that. There's something that has to have, I don't know if causative is the right word, but some comparable word, linking the two.
We see it as a snapshot of the imprint that the moment of your birth corresponded with, if that makes sense. That, to me, I'm
But-
trying to put it in a non-causal light.
Okay, but so it corresponds with this, and then what also corresponds is when there is this planetary interplay going on, that corresponds to certain personality or choices or what have you, that's all in there. That there's this corresponding linkage. You know, the point being, the operative word here is linkage, that there's a link there. And so whatever all you call it, causative or otherwise, you know,
Well, Jungian astrologers would say it's synchronistic. It's not causal. But nobody really understands synchronicity either, so it doesn't necessarily help.
Yeah, I'm just sensitive to the time. Let's call it a night and
But
we'll
to be
reconvene.
continued for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, with one natal chart due to
I'll be
Steve.
waiting for that chart.
Okay, have a great, we'll catch you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for being our guinea
Bye-bye.
pig.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.